Hi, I'm Eliza Chen, 26, and I'm a software developer who just landed what was supposed to be my dream job at Prism Technologies in Boston. What follows is the story of how I turned an office that treated me like their favorite punching bag into the stage for the most satisfying exit in corporate history. It begins, like most modern tragedies, with a notification. My first indication that Prism Technologies wasn't the progressive tech utopia they'd advertised came 3 weeks after I started. I was hunched over my keyboard, desperately trying to make sense of their labyrinthine codebase, the digital equivalent of being dropped blindfolded into the middle of Boston and told to find your way to a specific coffee shop in Cambridge without a map. A ping from the company-wide Slack channel lit up my screen. Derek, VP of Development. Anyone seen the new code from our latest hire? It's like watching a toddler try to solve differential equations. Eliza Chen, maybe stick to HTML? The why message was followed by a parade of laughing emojis, thumbs up, and that infuriating 100 symbol. And then came the responses. Jared. Cut her some slack, Derek. She's probably just having a bad month. Melissa. Maybe she can redesign our website instead. I hear girls have a good eye for pretty colors. Derek. Eliza Chen. No hard feelings, just team banter. Welcome to Prism. I sat there, my face burning, fingers hovering uselessly over my keyboard. What do you say to that? Thanks for the public humiliation. Can't wait for tomorrow's episode. Sorry, my girl brain can't comprehend your magnificent code. Please, sir, may I have another serving of workplace harassment? I typed and deleted 4 different responses before settling on a thumbs-up emoji, the universal symbol for I'm so, acknowledging this while dying inside. The radiator behind me hissed and clanked, a mechanical Greek chorus commenting on my humiliation. Someone laughed at a different joke across the office, the sound skipping across the open floor plan like a stone across water. I wondered if they were watching me, this strange new specimen under the microscope of corporate scrutiny. The thing is, I wasn't some coding novice who'd stumbled into tech on a whim. I had a master's in computer science from MIT, where I'd graduated, 3rd in my class. I'd led development teams at hackathons that created applications now being used by nonprofits across the country. I'd been coding since I was 12 when my parents bought our first family computer, and I discovered I could make it do things with lines of text that seemed like magic. But in the merciless hierarchy of Prism, none of that mattered. My education, my experience, my genuine passion for elegant code, all of it dissolved in the acid bath of office politics. I was the new girl, which apparently translated to open target, the fresh meat. The diversity checkbox that made their annual report look progressive while their actual culture remained firmly planted in the digital Stone Age. I closed Slack and stared at the lines of code on my screen, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. That felt like a small animal had curled up and died there. The cursor blinked at me accusingly, as if questioning why I wasn't immediately responding with some brilliant algorithm that would prove my worth once and for all. I remembered the recruitment spiel when I'd interviewed just 2 months ago. At Prism, we're a family. The recruiter had said it with such conviction, eyes bright with corporate Kool-Aid, that I'd actually believed her. If this was family, I'd rather be an orphan. At least orphans don't have to endure holiday dinners with people who actively want to see them fail. The rest of the day dragged on like a funeral procession. I found myself taking the long route to the bathroom to avoid walking past Derek's office. I skipped lunch rather than brave the break room where Jared and Melissa would be holding court. By the time 5:30 rolled around, my shoulders had permanently fused with my earlobes from tension. That night, I sat cross-legged on my couch, surrounded by the cozy clutter of my apartment, the only place in Boston that felt like a genuine sanctuary. Mismatched furniture collected from thrift stores, walls decorated with framed algorithms instead of motivational quotes, and an entire bookshelf dedicated to fantasy novels I read when coding problems kept me up at night. This was my space, free from judgment and Derek's wandering eyes. I called my sister Maya, the only person who would understand without immediately offering solutions I'd already considered and dismissed. Just quit, she said, her voice tinny through my phone speaker, the background noise suggesting she was still at her hospital shift. Life's too short for workplace abuse. You can stay with me until you find something else. I can't. I sighed, curling deeper into my couch, pulling the knitted blanket our grandmother had made over my legs. The job market is terrible, right? Now, and I need the health insurance. Mom's treatments aren't going to pay for themselves. The truth hung between us, unspoken but omnipresent. Mom's cancer had returned last spring, and the experimental treatment her oncologist recommended wasn't fully covered by her insurance. Maya's nurse's salary and my new developer position were the only things keeping our mother from having to choose between treatment and bankruptcy. Quitting wasn't just about my comfort. It was a luxury our family couldn't afford. Then document everything, Maya said. Every comment, every message. You never know when you'll need ammunition. I didn't know it then, but my sister had just handed me the blueprint for my salvation. The banter didn't stop at digital harassment. In the physical world of Prism's open concept office, because nothing says, we value your mental health like forcing you to code with zero privacy while someone microwaves fish 10 feet away, I became the office ghost, visible only when they needed someone to mock. I developed a sixth sense for their approach. My shoulders would tense before I even heard footsteps, like prey animals that sense a predator's presence through some ancient evolutionary warning system. I started wearing oversized headphones, not always playing music, just creating the illusion of a barrier they'd occasionally respect. Each morning began the same way. I'd arrive early, usually by 7:45, hoping to get some work done before the circus arrived. The office was eerily peaceful then. Just me, the occasional cleaning staff, and the hum of servers. For about an hour, I'd lose myself in the rhythm of coding, the only time I felt like myself at Prism. The dance of functions and variables was predictable, logical, unlike the chaotic human variables I'd encounter later. I'd developed a morning ritual that felt almost sacred in its consistency. Coffee from the machine, 2 sugars, enough milk to take the edge off the bitterness. Settle at my desk, check overnight system logs, refactor yesterday's code with fresh eyes, then dive into new development. For those precious minutes, I could almost convince myself that I belonged here, that my work mattered. Then, around 9:30, they'd start trickling in. The office would gradually fill with voices, laughter, the distinctive sound of expensive sneakers on polished concrete, and my sanctuary would dissolve like morning mist under a harsh sun. Derek always made an entrance, 6 feet something of tech bro swagger, dressed in whatever Silicon Valley had deemed acceptable that season, usually dark jeans and button-downs with just enough wrinkles to suggest he was too brilliant to care about ironing. His cologne arrived 10 seconds before he did, a cloud of sandalwood and entitlement that announced his presence like a herald before a king. He'd stop by my desk, always my desk, never starting his rounds with Jared or Tyler or any of the male developers, and find something to comment on. It was as reliable as a metronome and twice as mechanical. Sometimes I wondered if he rehearsed. These little interactions in the shower, crafting the perfect blend of condescension and plausible deniability. Working hard or hardly working, Eliza? Monday. Nice sweater. My grandma has one just like it. Tuesday. You look tired. Late night? Or just, accompanied by a vague hand gesture that could mean anything from coding to crying to something far more inappropriate. Wednesday. By Thursday, I'd started keeping a log in a password-protected document titled Daily Affirmations, just in case anyone glanced at my screen. Thursday, 9:34 a.m. Derek asked if I needed help understanding basic inheritance principles, loud enough for the entire pod to hear. Jared snickered. Melissa asked if I wanted to join the Girls in Code mentorship program she's starting, aimed at high school students. Friday, 10:15 a.m. Team meeting. Derek presented my optimization solution as his own. When I pointed out it was my work, he said, "Well, I had to fix it first, so..." Meeting notes credited him. 2 months in, the document was 17 pages long. But the real shift came during the company retreat in mid-October. Prism rented a rustic chic lodge in the Berkshires, the kind of place with exposed beams and unreliable Wi-Fi that costs more per night than my monthly rent. The promotional emails had promised team building, inspirational speakers, and breakthrough, innovation sessions. In reality, it was 3 days of passive-aggressive team competitions by day and open bars by night. I'd debated claiming a family emergency to avoid going, but Maya convinced me it would look suspicious. Besides, she'd said, it might be a chance to bond with some of the other departments, maybe make an ally or two. My sister, eternally optimistic in a way that would be annoying if it wasn't so endearing. So I packed my most professional yet comfortable clothes, loaded up my Kindle with escapist fantasy novels, and prepared to endure 72 hours of pretending to enjoy forced socialization. The 2-hour bus ride up was a special kind of torture, watching cliques form as naturally as oil separating from water, while I sat alone pretending to be deeply engaged with my phone. The lodge itself was admittedly beautiful, all stone fireplaces, and panoramic views of the mountains dressed in their autumn best. Under different circumstances, with different people, I might have appreciated the change of scenery. Instead, I spent the first day navigating the complex social choreography of retreat activities, trying to be present enough to avoid criticism, but invisible enough to avoid attention. By the second night, after too many rounds of company-sponsored drinks, my careful balancing act crumbled. Derek cornered me on the deserted patio while I was trying to get a moment of quiet. The rest of the team was inside, engaged in a vicious round of karaoke, butchering 80s power ballads with the same enthusiasm they brought to dismantling my confidence. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, stars scattered overhead, like debugging print statements across a particularly complex function. I'd been enjoying the momentary peace, the distant sounds of laughter and music muffled by glass doors, when the distinctive scrape of those doors opening shattered my solitude. "You know," he said, leaning too close, scotch heavy on his breath, "you'd do better here if you were more friendly." "I'm friendly," I said, trying to maintain some space between us. "I contribute to discussions. I help when people have questions. Not that kind of friendly." His hand found its way to my waist. "I mean the kind that recognizes how things really work here. Office politics." His fingers pressed into my side. "I could make things easier for you, or harder. Your choice." I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break free and run away without me. "I need to use the restroom." I locked myself in a bathroom stall and called Maya again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "I'm coming to get you," she said immediately. "You can't. We're in the middle of nowhere and I can't leave without it being obvious." "Then get evidence," Maya said firmly. "Record him if he tries again. Check your state laws, but Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for recording conversations." I spent the rest of the retreat strategically surrounded by groups, never alone. Derek watched me from across rooms, his eyes carrying unspoken threats. Back at the office, things escalated. The Slack messages became more pointed. "Derek. Eliza Chen. Can you explain why your module is crashing the entire system? This is basic stuff." "Jared. Maybe she's distracted thinking about the retreat." "Derek. There's always next retreat. Some people just need more hands-on mentoring." I felt sick every time my computer chimed, knowing it was likely another public flogging, but I kept documenting. Screenshots, timestamps, witnesses, the daily affirmations file grew, and then came the incident. It was a Tuesday, afternoon in late November. Outside, the first real snow of the season was falling in thick, lazy flakes that clung to the office windows before melting into teardrops. Inside, I was deep in debugging hell, trying to fix a critical issue before the 5 p.m. deployment deadline. I'd been making good progress, tracing the error through nested functions and untangling a particularly nasty inheritance problem that had been causing random system crashes. The code was finally starting to make sense, like when you stare at one of those magic eye images long enough and suddenly the hidden 3D picture emerges from the chaos. I was so absorbed that I'd forgotten to maintain my usual hypervigilance, which is why Derek's voice over my shoulder made me physically jump. "Team meeting in 5, the fishbowl. Don't be late." His tone suggested this was non-negotiable, despite the looming deployment deadline. "But I'm right in the middle of fixing the authentication bug," I protested, gesturing to my screen where my breakthrough was displayed in all its elegant logic. "It'll wait," he said, already walking away. This is important. The fishbowl was aptly nicknamed because everyone could see in, but you couldn't hear out. A glass-walled conference room designed, I suspect, by someone who'd never had their intelligence questioned in public, and thus couldn't understand why privacy might occasionally be valuable. I saved my work, made a quick note of where my thoughts had been heading so I could pick up the thread later, and reluctantly headed to the meeting. A knot of dread had formed between my shoulder blades. Derek's important meetings had a nasty habit of becoming public spectacles. As the team filed, and I noticed a few sidelong glances in my direction. Melissa's lips were twitching with suppressed amusement. Jared was studiously avoiding eye contact. Whatever was coming, they already knew about it. The exclusion was so routine it barely registered as a fresh hurt. Just another bruise layered over existing contusions. Derek waited until everyone was seated before closing the door with theatrical finality. He moved to the front of the room, connected his laptop to the projector with the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to fight to be taken seriously, and flashed a slide onto the screen. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. It was an image of jumbled, inefficient code, my code from my first week before I understood their systems, before I knew about their custom libraries and proprietary frameworks. Next to it was a picture of a confused-looking woman from a stock photo, cartoon question marks floating around her head, clearly meant to represent me. The slide title read, "How Not to Code, a Cautionary Tale." This, Derek said with theatrical gravity, is what happens when we prioritize diversity hires over talent. The room went quiet. Even Jared and Melissa looked uncomfortable. "This took me hours to fix," Derek continued, clicking to show his improved version, which, ironically, was almost identical to what I'd submitted the previous week after learning their systems. "This is why we need experienced developers who understand enterprise architecture." I sat there, feeling as though I'd been airlifted out of my body and was watching the scene from somewhere near the ceiling, observing this woman, this version of me, being systematically dismantled in front of her peers. When Derek finally asked if I had anything to add, I managed to say only, "Thank you for the feedback," in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. That night, I didn't call Maya. I didn't document the incident in my file. Instead, I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by empty takeout containers, and made a decision. I was done being the punchline. It was time to become the joke's architect. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment like a caged animal, replaying the meeting in my mind on endless loop. Every snicker, every nodding head. The way Derek had looked at me when he asked if I had anything to add, expectant, almost hopeful that I'd break down, or lash out so he could add emotional and unprofessional to the list of my perceived failings. Around 3 a.m., I found myself sitting on my kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, staring at the collection of takeout menus magnetized to its surface. Chinese, Thai, pizza, each one a testament to the nights I'd been too exhausted from navigating Prism's hostile waters to cook. My life had shrunk to this. Working, enduring, recovering, repeat. An infinite loop with no break condition. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How are you holding up?" She was on night shift at the hospital, probably stealing a moment between patients to check on her little sister. "I'm fine," I typed automatically, then deleted it. If I couldn't be honest with Maya, who could I be honest with? "Not good," I wrote instead. "They're never going to see me as competent. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Her response came quickly. "Then make them see you. You're Eliza Chen. You once hacked the school's attendance system to give everyone perfect attendance because you thought the policy was unfair. You've never backed down from a challenge." I smiled despite myself. 8th grade felt like several lifetimes ago. But Maya was right about one thing. I had never been one. To accept injustice quietly, not until Prism had ground me down into this shadow version of myself. "What would 14-year-old Eliza do?" Maya texted again. "Something probably illegal," I responded. "Maybe not illegal, but definitely memorable." I sat with that thought as the refrigerator hummed against my back. What would the Eliza who hadn't yet learn to make herself small do? She'd fight back, but not with tears or outbursts that would only reinforce their narrative about emotional women in tech. She'd use their own weapons against them: data, evidence, proof. By the time dawn broke, casting my kitchen in the pale blue light of early morning, I had a plan. The next morning, I arrived at the office a full hour earlier than usual, which meant beating even the most ambitious developers. The security guard barely glanced up as I badged in, just another eager coder getting a head start. His coffee steam fogged his glasses as he waved me through, completely unaware that he was admitting a revolutionary, not just another worker bee. The office was empty, lights automatically brightening as I moved through the space. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floors, each step reinforcing my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman who'd been dismissed, every diversity hire who'd been undermined, every person who'd been made to feel smaller than their capabilities. I pulled out a small external drive and plugged it into my laptop. Over the past 2.5 months, I'd been methodically backing up evidence, a digital trail of hostility that even the most skeptical HR representative couldn't dismiss. Screenshots of Slack conversations showing persistent undermining and mockery, meeting recordings, Massachusetts being a one-party consent state was my saving grace, capturing Derek's dismissive tone. Emails where suggestions from me were ignored only to be praised when proposed by male colleagues, performance reviews that contradicted my actual contributions, Git commits showing my work being repurposed under others' names. It was damning, but dispersed. Isolated incidents that could be explained away as misunderstandings or oversensitivity. I needed something more, something definitive. A smoking gun that would unite all these scattered pieces into an undeniable pattern of harassment and discrimination. I'd noticed early on that Derek was sloppy with security. He'd leave his computer unlocked when he went for coffee. His passwords were variations of his dog's name and birth year, thanks to the many photos on his desk and the fact that he'd once loudly reset his password while on the phone. Most importantly, he used the same credentials for multiple systems, including the internal messaging platform and his personal email that he sometimes accessed at work. Was what I was about to do ethical? Debatable. Legal? Gray area at best. Necessary? Absolutely. I had 20 minutes before the early birds would start trickling in. I navigated to Derek's desk and heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would set off the security system. I sat down. His computer was locked, but I knew from observation that his password was likely Bruno 2016 or some variation. 3 tries. Later, Bruno 2016 I was in. I didn't have to search long. His personal email was open in a browser tab, and in his sent folder were exchanges with other female employees who had left the company. The language ranged from inappropriate to explicit. There were promises of promotions in exchange for private meetings, threats of poor reviews if they didn't comply, and in one particularly damning email, a direct statement about hiring me. She's not as qualified as the male candidates, but have you seen her LinkedIn photo? Office eye candy, at least? My hands shaking, I forwarded the most incriminating emails to a secure account I'd created specifically for this purpose. Then I logged out, carefully replacing everything exactly as I'd found it, and returned to my desk. By the time Derek sauntered in at 9:45, I was deep in legitimate work, my external drive safely back in my bag. Over the next week, I methodically gathered more evidence. I installed a subtle screen recording app on my laptop that documented every Slack message. I saved emails where Derek took credit for my work. I even managed to record a conversation where he suggested my next performance review would go better if I joined him for drinks to discuss my career trajectory. I compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier with a simple title, Prism Technologies, a Culture Analysis. Then I waited for the perfect moment. It came sooner than expected. I spent the weekend fine-tuning my presentation, organizing the evidence into a narrative so clear and damning it would be impossible to dismiss. My apartment transformed into a war room, laptop on the coffee table, notes spread across the couch, empty tea mugs marking the passage of time like archaeological layers. Maya came over Saturday night with takeout and moral support, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor as I walked her through my plan. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, not for the first time. It's nuclear. There's no going back once you push this button. I paused, cursor hovering over a particularly brutal Slack exchange where Derek had publicly questioned whether I was technically capable of understanding the codebase architecture. That's the point, I said finally. There's no going back. Anyway, even if I quit tomorrow and find another job, this will follow me. The doubt, the second-guessing, the ghost of their voices in my head telling me I'm not good enough. I need to excise it completely. Maya nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then make it count. Monday morning, I learned that the quarterly all-hands meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. It was Prism's attempt at transparency, a 2-hour session, where executives shared company performance metrics and team leads presented their successes. It was held in the large conference center on the top floor, with all 150 employees in attendance, including the CEO, board members, and the recently expanded HR team that had been brought in to address culture concerns after 3 unexpected departures. All women. All former targets of Derek, though that connection had apparently escaped management's notice. Derek was scheduled to present our team's achievements. As VP of Development, this was his moment to shine, to take credit for the work his team had done while performing the role of brilliant, if demanding, leader. I knew from previous all-hands meetings that he considered these presentations his personal runway, a chance to strut before the company's leadership and reinforce his position. In the corporate pecking order, it was perfect. Tuesday night, I barely slept. My mind raced with alternate scenarios. What if the tech failed? What if I lost my nerve? What if this destroyed not just Derek's career, but mine as well? I tossed and turned, rehearsing my words, imagining faces, in the audience, bracing myself for every possible reaction. By morning, exhaustion had crystallized into a strange, almost otherworldly calm. I dressed with unusual care, black pants, crisp white button-down, the blazer I normally saved for client meetings, professional armor for the battle ahead. I volunteered to help set up the presentation tech for the all-hands. No one questioned it. I was, after all, the eager-to-please new hire, always ready to take on additional responsibilities. The IT team was grateful for the extra hands, especially since the conference center's AV system had a reputation for last-minute glitches. While testing the system an hour before the meeting, I loaded 2 presentations onto the conference room computer, Derek's official slides, and a second file hidden in a subfolder, ready to be activated with a wireless presentation remote I'd keep in my pocket. As employees filed in, I took a seat, near the back, close to an exit. My heart wasn't racing anymore. I felt strangely calm, like I'd stepped outside of time into a space where consequences didn't exist yet. The CEO opened with the usual platitudes about growth and innovation. Various directors presented their quarterly successes, and then it was Derek's turn. He strutted to the front of the room, all confidence and practiced charm. Before I get into our technical achievements, I want to acknowledge my incredible team, he began, flashing that smile that never quite reached his eyes, particularly some of our newer members who have really stepped up. I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The screen behind Derek flickered. Instead of his carefully designed slide showing development metrics, a new image appeared. It was a screenshot of the Slack message where he'd mocked my code publicly. Derek faltered, turning to look at the screen. Confusion crossed his face. Press the button again. The presentation advanced to the next slide, an email where he discussed my hiring as office eye candy. The room went silent. Another click. A recording began to play. Derek at the retreat, his hand on my waist, suggesting I needed to be more friendly. Derek's face drained of color. There seems to be a technical issue, he said, his voice strained. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. No technical issue, Derek. Just some additional context for your presentation on team achievements. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, continuing to advance the slides with each step. More Slack messages, more emails, comments about other female employees, evidence of him taking credit for work he hadn't done. What you're seeing is a small sample of the daily reality for women on Derek's team, I said, my voice remarkably steady. This isn't about one bad manager. It's about a culture that enables harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. I turned to face the room, The CEO was half standing, mouth slightly open. The HR director was frantically taking notes. And my teammates, Jared, Melissa, and the others who had joined in the banter, were staring at their laps, unwilling to meet my eyes. I've compiled a comprehensive report, I continued, holding up a USB drive. Everything is sourced, dated, and verified. I'm providing copies to HR, to the board, and, if necessary, to my attorney. Derek found his voice. This is taken out of context. This is recorded in a one-party consent state. I finished for him. Yes, it is, and the context is perfectly clear. I placed the USB drive on the podium and turned to leave. As I walked down the center aisle, the silence was absolute. I could feel their eyes on me, some shocked, some guilty, some relieved that someone had finally said what they'd been afraid to. At the door, I paused and turned back. Oh, and Derek? I quit. But you should know. The code you've been mocking? It's now running your entire authentication system. Turns out the diversity hire knew what she was doing after all. The door closed behind me with a satisfying click. The closing of the conference room door behind me was simultaneously the loudest and quietest sound I'd ever heard. A soft mechanical click that represented the demolition of bridges, the burning of professional ships. I walked through the silent hallway, past stunned colleagues who'd followed me out of the meeting, their expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been respect. The elevator ride to the lobby stretched into an eternity. I stood alone in the brushed metal box, watching the floor numbers decrease with methodical indifference. My reflection in the polished doors looked different somehow. Shoulders straighter, chin higher, eyes clearer. I barely recognized myself. The art fallout was swift and comprehensive. By the time I reached the lobby, my company email had already been deactivated. Standard procedure for resignations, but it happened faster than I'd ever seen. Security probably had instructions to escort me out, but I'd moved too quickly for them to intercept me. As I pushed through the revolving door into the crisp autumn air, my phone began buzzing with notifications like an angry hornet's nest. The first was from Maya, a simple that somehow contained multitudes. Then came the deluge. LinkedIn messages from colleagues I'd barely spoken to, people from other departments, even a few I'd never directly interacted with. That was incredible. I've wanted to say something for months. What you did took guts. You just said what we've all been thinking. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I stood on the sidewalk outside Prism's gleaming glass tower, people flowing around me like water around a stone, and felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Vindication tinged with mourning, relief shadowed by anxiety, triumph threaded with uncertainty. The career I'd worked so hard to build had just imploded in spectacular fashion. And yet somehow I was still standing. A message from Tyler, one of the quieter developers who'd always been civil but never particularly friendly. I should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. Thank you for being braver than the rest of us. That one nearly broke me. I blinked back sudden tears as pedestrians bustled past, oblivious to the personal earthquake that had just reshaped my entire professional landscape. How strange that life simply continued around my private apocalypse. Taxis honking, couples laughing, tourists consulting maps, all while my world reconstituted itself into something unrecognizable. A text from Maya. Well, did you do it? It's done, I replied. I'll call you in a bit. I walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, ordered the largest mocha they had, and sat at a corner table watching the world continue as if nothing monumental had happened. People typing on laptops, couples sharing pastries, baristas calling out orders, all blissfully unaware that somewhere nearby, a corporate empire was dealing with its very own insurrection. By evening, the news had spread throughout Boston's tight-knit tech community. My phone continued to buzz with messages from former classmates, other developers, even recruiters. Heard what happened at Prism. When you're ready to talk, I have some opportunities that would value your skills and your integrity. 3 days later, I received an official email from Prism's board of directors. It contained a formal apology, an offer of severance, substantial enough to cover several months of expenses, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the specifics of what had transpired. I forwarded it to the lawyer Maya had insisted I consult. Don't sign anything yet, she advised. That NDA is their protection, not yours. After some negotiation, I agreed to a modified agreement that allowed me to speak about workplace culture issues generally while not naming specific individuals. In return, my severance package was increased, and, most importantly to me, Prism committed to a third-party audit of their hiring and promotion practices. Derek was placed on administrative leave the day after my presentation. 2 weeks later, a terse announcement confirmed he was no longer with the company. Jared and Melissa both sent awkward apology emails that rang hollow, but suggested they'd received their own reckonings. The most surprising contact came a month later, as I was interviewing with a smaller tech firm known for its progressive policies. A message from Prism's new VP of Engineering, a woman I'd never met. What you did forced necessary change. We've instituted mandatory training, revised our reporting procedures, and created an anonymous feedback system. The culture is slowly improving. If you ever want to come back, there would be a place for you. I appreciated the gesture but declined. Some bridges once burned serve better as beacons than passageways. It's been 6 months since my dramatic exit from Prism. The winter that followed was both literally and metaphorically dark. Days of questioning my decisions, nights of wondering if I'd torpedoed my entire career, and the constant underlying stress of financial uncertainty. Mom's treatments continued, and while the severance package helped, the specter of unemployment loomed like a persistent shadow. But spring brought unexpected growth. The smaller tech firm that had reached out, Nexus Digital, turned out to be a genuine believer in creating ethical workplaces. During my interview, the CTO mentioned my Prism exit not as a liability but as evidence of integrity. "We need people who stand up for what's right," she said, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes direct and evaluative. "Technical skills can be developed. Character is foundational. I'm now leading a development team there. 5 brilliant developers with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. My technical skills are valued, my boundaries respected, and perhaps most surprisingly, my experiences at Prism are considered an asset. I've been asked to help review and refine company policies around harassment and professional conduct. My office has a door, an actual door that closes. Sometimes I shut it just because I can, marveling at the simple luxury of privacy, of not being constantly on display. My team communicates primarily through a Slack channel, where the jokes are genuinely funny without being at anyone's expense, where questions are met with explanations rather than mockery, where success is celebrated collectively rather than individually claimed. My experience has become a strange sort of professional calling card. Not the scarlet letter I'd feared, but a badge of courage in an industry finally reckoning with its toxic underbelly. I've been invited to speak at women in tech conferences, asked to contribute to articles about workplace culture, approached by former colleagues seeking advice on navigating their own difficult situations. Maya likes to joke that I should put corporate whistleblower on my business cards, but the truth is less dramatic. I'm just a software developer who reached her breaking point and decided that dignity was worth more than a steady paycheck. I'm just a woman who stopped accepting the unacceptable. Last month, I visited Mom at her home in Connecticut. Her treatments are working. The cancer is in retreat, her energy slowly returning. We sat on her porch swing, watching the neighborhood kids race bikes up and down the sidewalk, their shouts and laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "You look different," she said, studying my face with the particular attention only mothers seem capable of. "More like yourself." I considered this. "I feel more like myself." "Was it worth it?" she asked. She'd been horrified when I first told her about my explosive resignation, worried about the implications for my career, for her medical bills, for my future. I watched a young girl wobble past on a bike with training wheels, her face a mask of determination. "Absolutely," I said. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed silent. If I'd endured the banter and inappropriate advances, focusing only on the code and the career advancement, I might be still at Prism, perhaps with a promotion earned through gritted teeth and compromised self-respect. I might have more money in my savings account, fewer sleepless nights replaying confrontations in my mind, but I wouldn't have this: the knowledge that when tested, I chose truth over comfort. That when faced with injustice, I didn't just document it, I exposed it. Last week, I received a LinkedIn message from a young woman who'd recently started at Prism. "The culture has changed," she wrote. "They talk about what happened last year in our orientation as an example of how not to operate. Your name isn't mentioned because of the NDA, but everyone knows. Thank you." I didn't respond. Some acknowledgements don't need replies, but I saved the message in a new file on my computer. Not daily affirmations this time, but something simpler. Why? The tech industry has a long way to go. One dramatic exit in one mid-sized company doesn't change systemic issues overnight, but perhaps it creates a tiny fracture in the foundation, a beginning, a possibility that others might see and think, if she could do it, so can I. My code still runs Prism's authentication system. Sometimes I think about that, how something can be simultaneously undervalued and essential. How the very people who dismissed my contributions rely on them every day without knowing it. It's a decent metaphor for women in tech, I suppose, but I prefer to think of it as something simpler. Proof that I was always exactly as capable as I believed myself to be. That the problem was never my code, but the screens through which others chose to view it, and me. So here's my advice, for whatever it's worth. Document everything. Know your worth. And when the moment comes to choose between comfortable silence and difficult truth, remember that screens can be turned around, and sometimes the most powerful code you'll ever write is the story of your own dignity. Just make sure you keep a backup.